Welcome to The Writer's Dream. This is a show where authors talk about how they write their books, how they publish their books, and how they market their books. Please visit us on YouTube. We have about 90 interviews, 90 different authors, all different genres, talking about the craft of writing and the wonderful accomplishment of publishing, and certainly the interesting ideas that we have of marketing. If you are a writer, or you just like books, this is a place to go for a lot of information about authorship. We are also on Facebook. If you would like to ask a question of The Writer's Dream, please go on Facebook and put your question there, and we'll do our best in order to answer it. Today's guest is Eileen Obser, and she has written a memoir called Only You. And she is also a teacher. She's a teacher of creative writing at Suffolk Community College and a freelance writer. Welcome, Eileen.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'm thrilled to have you here, Eileen. Tell us about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background, your life.
Oh, well, I grew up in Queens,
Me
New
too.
York. Oh, good. And that's the background for my book, Only You. And I've been out here on the East End for 38 years. It's hard to believe. But it's been a wonderful experience because I've managed to teach, I think we have 65 libraries in Suffolk County. I think that's the figure. And I think I've taught at 25 of them over the last 20 years.
Now, are these workshops?
Workshops, writing workshops. You know, sometimes one workshop, it's usually a series of classes. Mm-hmm. And again, I've been at the Connecticut Library in Bohemia for 6 years, the Hampton Library in Bridgehampton for 6 years. So I'm their writer in residence, more or less. And I've been at Suffolk Community College, the main campus in Selden, for 17 years, teaching creative writing, in that case, fiction and nonfiction. The libraries, I mainly do personal essay and memoir, which I'm doing now. And I love it.
Do you when you teach the creative writing course, do you have do you deal with different genre in different workshops, or do you just start out with just the idea of how you tap into creativity to get a flow of writing going?
Depends on the workshop. I've taught many different kinds of creative writing workshops, journaling, humor writing, which you really can't teach humor, but you can talk about humor in a way that it brings it out of the people. I've taught workshops for young people, but mainly I'm focused on memoir writing and personal essay writing. And they're there for a reason, the people who show up. So they know they want to be writing about their own experiences.
I agree. I do a workshop with another author on self-publishing, and the people who come always come with, I have an idea, I want to write a book, and I don't know how to start. And it isn't, I mean, I don't know if you agree with this, but the hardest thing to do with a book is to start it.
Absolutely. I hear this all the time, and I've never written before, and the fear that goes with it. I was there once myself as a young person, so I know. You know, before I started taking workshops in New York City at the New School when I was still living in Manhattan.
I remember the New School.
In the city, yes, that's where I started taking workshops. And the fear is there. And if you don't have a teacher who's patient and motivational, that might be the last class you'll ever attend. Thank goodness it doesn't seem to happen, hopefully, in my classes, but I hear stories.
No, I hear you're a very good teacher.
I hear stories, you know. But just to come there and just be willing to just give yourself a break. I see it all the time, and it's so beautiful.
So I would think that it's the questions that you ask that enable someone to put that first sentence down. Do you have like exercises that you give them for that first sentence?
I give them prompts, and I vary them depending on what the group is. If they've been with me before, I'm always looking for new prompts or different ways of saying something similar. But and and that works, you know. And we discuss. I quote from different writers. They bring in their ideas too. I try to make it so it's a collaboration.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And you know,
I'm
I
going
have
to give
some
you a
good
little
stories.
secret that I have about writing. I do a lot of driving. I live in Nassau County, and of course I come out here, but I come out east for various reasons. So I listen to audiobooks, and I have found that listening to audiobooks really helps me about my own writing. It helps me to think about the different styles, and just hearing it helps me to think in terms of how to start a book, because I'm right now in the process of, I just published a third book and I want to write a fourth one. So I listen very carefully to how the books start, the different styles. And it helps me to think about, you know, how I'm going to start and what my own style will be.
That's great.
So your favorite is memoirs?
Memoirs, personal essays. I have a whole background of writing and publishing personal essays. This is the first book.
Yes, and so evidently the teaching actually, was that an inspiration to you?
Oh, teaching is amazing. I'm learning from my students all the time. You know, I even in the acknowledgement say I've learned more from them than they've learned from me. And this book, though, is not just a new project. It's been with me for over 20 years, from conception to publication. So.
But I think that's a sign of a good teacher if you are learning from your students as well, because then there's that collaboration, which I think instills a confidence in the students that enables them to to really blossom, so to speak. Now, you're also a freelance writer.
Well, I'm only in the sense that I've published. You know, I always have new ideas for essays. Three sections of this book were originally published as essays. And, you know, I've published all over the place. Early on, just ideas that came to my mind, and they wound up in essay form.
I have here Newsday, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Village Voice, the East Hampton Star, Proteus.
Right.
And these were personal essays that you...
Right, and the Washington Post, Boston Globe.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, early on. And they paid good money, too. I mean, local papers can't afford to pay you.
Not.
But it's still wonderful to be published in the East Hampton Star.
Sure.
I've been published a lot in that.
I know, since I've been doing this TV show, every once in a while somebody says, "You look really familiar." And I never think that they might have seen me on the show, because the show's on Cablevision as well. And maybe they've gone on YouTube, because we have over 6,000 hits already, so that's pretty good.
Great.
So, but I never think about that, and I just ended up the other day saying, no, I just have a familiar face, because I get this, and I'm sure people are now recognizing you.
Well, the name they recognize. They don't put my picture in the East Hampton Star, but they do, and I'm always flattered when they remember a certain piece that I wrote, because if it's tied into the community or not, you know, that's a good feeling.
Well, that's
that I'm being read and appreciated. You know, I love that.
Well, that's you know, I think there's two parts to writing. You write because you want to get your personal experience out. You think it's something, a story that you want to write, and then the other part of it is you really want someone to read it and know you through your stories.
Absolutely, that's part of it.
I mean, I think, I don't know if this is true. Let me see what you think about this. But I think if you don't want people to know you through your writing, why would you write?
Well, there are people like that, and they change their names, or they write fiction.
Yeah, but there's something, the name is, to me, not important. There's something about you, the inner you, the ideas that you have, that if you write, I would think, and you publish.
Right, even fiction, you're right, even fiction writers.
Yeah, I mean, there's,
right.
People have told me after reading my books, they said, oh, I really got to know you now. And I mean, my main character is a teenage girl. So.
Well, that's you.
So
that's
maybe,
the real you.
I guess so. I guess I never really got past that. But yeah, I do want them to know parts of my life and the way I think about certain things. I think that's the fun of writing, is to get that out in a, you know, kind of a mass media format.
Right. I find after a while that whether it's essays or now with the book, which is the first 20 years of my life, primarily the teenage years, but my personality is there. It's still the same. It's the personality I have now. If I have an essay that was of something that happened 2 years ago, it comes through, and they say, "Oh yes, I could tell that you wrote that." You know, even if I'm hearing this from family and friends because they hear me conversationally. So I've managed to capture that. That's a great feeling.
So memoir and personal essay have always been your favorite thing to write.
Yes.
And because I usually ask why memoir. Memoirs are very popular now. Why do you think that's so?
Why is it popular?
Yeah.
There's so many articles on that subject. You know, they're just all over the place.
But why would you pick up a
Some of the-
memoir rather than a mystery, let's say?
Well, it depends on the memoir and the story. I really can't get into the really depressing.
No.
Well, I do. If I
Well, you
have
can watch
to, I
the
do.
news for that.
I can just watch the news. Thank you. Yeah, but I don't pick them up just to wallow in sadness. But depending on the story, of course, I just love to read about other people's lives. I have published fiction and written fiction, but I don't think I'm as good at it. Maybe that's where I find I'm better at nonfiction, but that's a very nothing answer, I suppose, not very detailed. I like it, you know, when I tap into myself, and that's what I find with all these students that I teach over the years. Some of them, I'm in touch with them. I do a newsletter quarterly since 2006. All right, so that's what, 8 years of the 20-year I'm teaching, but I'm in touch with people from way back who tell me if they've published anything, if they're still writing, where are you teaching next? This is what so-and-so is doing. I get a lot of satisfaction out of that.
Okay, so the process of writing a memoir, in that process, going back in time, you contacted people those days?
Well,
It sounds like I'm talking about the
No.
Civil War.
Depends on the situation. I kept journals since I was a young
wow.
teenager, actually. Journals, diaries, photographs, that's all cited in here in my disclaimer. How did I know all this? So I had access to all that material. I write about my first honeymoon to Billy, we're on the cover. I don't know if you can see, if they could show it.
Yes, they could see
That's
that.
me at 16, Billy at 17 on Rockaway Beach in Queens.
Right.
And we married 2 years
How come
later.
I didn't see you there? I went to Rockaway too
Well.
with my boyfriend.
Oh, I'm sorry, we missed each other. I don't even know who took this photo, and I did try to find out. I am in touch with many of the people who were teenagers with me who are still alive and well.
That must have
Amazing.
That must have been
They
great.
even came to one of my readings, a bunch of them, with their mates. It was wonderful. And where was I talking about? So this photo I don't know, but so many others I have. And my
Yes, you
publisher
showed me. You
agreed
have
to use this on the cover.
Yearbook photos and
Oh, I have all that.
wedding pictures.
I
and-
tell my students, don't throw anything out.
That's true.
I even wrote a blog about that, which could be found on my website. It's called Lost, I think. Don't throw anything out. You never know when you'll need it.
Oh, I can't tell you how many people come to my workshop with a packet of letters, and they say, you know, these are letters from my grandmother who immigrated from Poland or someplace, and I think it's such a good story. How do I get to write this story? And I love that because I love my family history. I have a few cousins who have really delved into the family history. I have not so much because I lived with my grandmother and my mother and father, and my mother was a great storyteller, and she knew both sides of the family. It's so important to have a storyteller.
Yes.
And what's secondly more important is to have a storyteller who records. Either voice recording or video or just writing in journals. And the fact that you kept journals had to be so helpful. So tell us about the book without giving it all away. Why teenage years?
Well, that's interesting because in my mid-40s, I decided I wanted to figure out the relationships I had in my life with men, the men in my life. Starting with, that marriage to Billy, but also, with the boyfriends, my brothers. I have 3 younger brothers. My father, my cousin, buddy to whom this book is dedicated. I just wanted to figure out where I was at with, it just came to me. So I wrote the first, I wrote the first one called about Lenny. I changed his name to Lenny. My first boyfriend at age 13. He was 17. This is the age of the 50s, no sex and drugs, just
Right.
some alcohol, but mainly rock and roll, you know.
If we smoked, it was a big thing, right?
Well, at 13 I didn't, but 16 maybe. Yeah. But so I wrote it easily, and I sent it to Newsday, which at that time had a Sunday magazine. Mm-hmm. They immediately bought it and published it. And I thought, well, this is amazing. I'll write a chapter about each one of these men in my life, send it out, get it published, and I'll have a book in no time. Didn't happen that way. You know, it just didn't happen that way.
How did it happen?
Well, it was a slow process. It's not easy. When you get married, it's not, you can't confine it to one small chapter for one thing, to an excerpt. And but I did start writing. I managed to keep writing, and eventually I did have a book.
Now,
but I didn't get them all, the sections published.
You and Billy are teenagers when you get married.
Right. 18 and 19 years old.
So that's, and we did that in those days. We got
Right.
married very young in those days. And I would imagine that as you got older, you began to look back on that as that was pretty profound. It had a profound effect on my life to be married so young.
Absolutely.
And it must have influenced, because I have the same feelings of my relationship with my brother. How did that really affect my relationship with my brother and my father? How did that affect the men that I chose to either go out with or marry? You know, I think that's got to be a question that, if you really think about things, it has to be a question you want to answer if you're really interested in looking into
Right.
why your relationships are what they are.
And because that was complicated, the marriage, I think that even gave me more desire to figure it out, to want to communicate it for other people, but also to myself. Mm-hmm. As I got older and more mature. I certainly was not mature at the time I married.
No.
And other people around us were getting married too. Mm-hmm. Billy, he lost his family. He was an only child, and his mother died at age 42 of cancer. I'm not telling too much here, I suppose. His maternal grandmother died the same year. Then his father committed suicide.
Oh dear.
A year and a half later. And then his paternal grandmother, who I became attached to, she died. Here I was a young person. I was always going to funerals. And so he was alone. I was the oldest child in my family, the only girl, therefore the babysitter, the caretaker in some cases. So I fell right into the role.
And the fixer, yeah.
I fell right into it.
Sure.
You know, I was just made to order for him. Mm-hmm. But it was a lot of problems involved in it.
Now, what do you, how far along do you take the book? You say teenage years, do you bring it to the present?
No, it ended at, I don't know how much I should give away, but I give it, I ended.
You don't have to say, just how many years,
Just 2 years of the marriage.
Okay.
Okay, then I ended, because it was a much longer book, but I was advised that it was really 2 books in one.
So you can have a sequel.
I do have a sequel if I choose to publish that.
Good idea.
I had very good advice when I went back to school, as part of my story too, to the MFA program at Stony Brook, Southampton. And a couple of professors, one in particular, gave me good advice to cut it. A couple other people gave me that advice too. So it just went on too much. So there I have all this, I find, and other people tell me, pretty interesting material. So I'll see what I do with that. I don't know. But
I find some people's memoirs are entirely too long.
Yes.
And there's stuff that I think they need a good editor. I think when you're writing, especially, I've never done it, but I can imagine in a memoir, you're writing a lot of stuff that's just personal to you. You have to make the distinction of what's personal to you and what might be useful and interesting to somebody else.
Right.
So, and sometimes it works both ways, but sometimes it doesn't.
This has a lot of, besides my family, me, and Billy, whatever, it has a lot of popular culture in it. You know, what was going on in the era of
That was
the
a fun
50s.
time.
well, whatever, with the news,
Yeah.
the TV shows. I had to research that whole thing, which was another pleasure for me to research, to make sure I had all the years right, the timing right for the songs, and a lot of songs, a lot of rock and roll in this.
I
in this
dated a
book.
man for a while, and he was never a fan of rock and roll. And I will hear a rock and roll song, and I will remember exactly where I was and what I was doing at that time. And I couldn't imagine how he lived through, he's just the same age as me, how he lived through that era and wasn't able to be inspired by rock and roll. I found it almost a block to the relationship because sometimes
Yes.
I had nothing to talk to him about.
I can understand that.
Yeah.
I don't think I've run across somebody
It was
like
like
that.
the
who's personal
background to your
me.
life, It was like wallpaper.
Well, the title is Only You, the
Yeah,
Platters song.
Only You, yes,
They're
I
in
know.
there because we actually met the Platters a couple of times as teenagers
Right.
at a nightclub
Mine
in
was 16
Nassau.
candles.
Excuse me?
16 candles.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
So would you like to read from the book?
Oh, if you want me to.
I do.
I'll read a little part to put my glasses on for this, showing the young Eileen. This is, I don't know if I should read that one. About when I was 13 with the boyfriend, or maybe I'll do this one. In the fall of 1955, the big song hit Rock Around the Clock and the film Blackboard Jungle were released. Remember that? Elvis Presley appeared on television 3 times during the next year. Negro groups, white groups, amazing new sounds emerged with each new week. Some of it was sexy, and we all slow danced and played with the music. Alone in my room, listening or dancing in place, I felt vibrations surge through my entire body. With my radio and my school books, I often huddled in the corner of the bed in my tiny room, the only isolated place in our crowded household. For about 6 years, I had shared this small space, no larger than some people's closets, with my brother Allie. We had bunk beds, and I, being older, managed to snag the more desirable top bunk. From the living room bay window, I could look out over our street with Central Avenue to the right and the Lutheran Cemetery to the left.
You must have lived a few blocks from me because I lived across the street from the Lutheran Cemetery.
In Glendale, Queens?
No, in Middle Village.
I lived across from Middle Village in Glendale. Something, the same cemetery.
Yeah, on the other side.
Well, we'll have to talk. Directly across from the Long Island Railroad tracks. Alone in my room, I could play loud music, practice dancing, or even pretend I was one of the Negro male singers I admired so much and belt out some lyrics to my imaginary audience of admirers. I use the word Negro, by the way, because that's what we called it then.
Yeah, exactly.
If I said black female singers, it's not true to the times,
That's
so
right.
I can't do it.
Exactly.
I thought about all the times I listened to Alan Freed on WINS
I did
1010
my
on the
math
dial.
homework to Alan Freed.
When he first came to New York, Freed's show was called the Moondogs Rock and Roll House Party, but someone else who used the name Moondog sued him. It became the Alan Freed Show. "Go, man, go," Alan would yell. Johnny Ace might have been singing the real slow hit, Pledging My Love. Yeah, 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 Alan thumped on his table. Fast songs or slow, he was always pounding away. When I had enough of his high percussion sound, I'd switch to WNEW for a gentler tone and calmer disc jockeys like William B. Williams or Ted Brown.
Right.
A couple of times, a group of us from the candy store, guys and girls, went to the Alan Freed shows at the Brooklyn Paramount Theater. Alan Freed and his rock and roll band with Sam the Man Taylor headed up the programs. The theater was jam-packed every time with teenage fans. That's when we first saw Chuck Berry glide across the stage floor, holding his
Maybelline.
guitar as he played. We also saw Lillian Briggs belt out, "I Want You to Be My Baby." The Moonglows sing Sincerely, and Fats Domino at the piano with his famous Ain't That a Shame. Did you go to those shows?
My mother wouldn't let me,
I was with my older
but I
cousin,
listened
Buddy.
to the music.
2 years older, my cousin, I was allowed to go. What a thrill it was for us to be right there watching those rock and roll stars in person. The girls in the audience, including some of my friends, swooned and screamed over and over. I wasn't a screamer, I just liked to listen. Frankie Lyman and the teenagers had us dancing in the aisles to Why Do Fools Fall in Love, and Don Cherry sang one of my favorites, Band of Gold. Lost in these thoughts while smiling and humming along with Tweedledee by Laverne Baker, a knock at the bedroom door startled me out of my daydreaming. Eileen, will you turn that thing off? Alan Freed was still pounding away. I lowered the volume. Come out here, I need you. I reluctantly unlocked the door. What's up, Mama? For the life of me, I will never understand how you can like that music, she said, pointing to my radio. It's right out of the jungle. Didn't you hear that? We all heard it.
Oh, yeah. And it was
Teenagers
a
now
communist
have
plot.
Oh, I didn't hear that part. But when I read to undergrads at Suffolk, they hear different reasons for the songs they hear now, you know. So, which I'd heard many times before, and which I figured I wouldn't get into any argument over right now. What's up? Watch the kids for me. I'm going to the store. Do I have to? I'm doing my homework. My mother was already in her coat and scarf, putting on her gloves. Yes, you have to. Do your homework out here, and don't whine. When I was 10 and my brother Allie was 7, my mother gave birth to my brother Bob. 2 years later, my brother Tom was born. So at age 12, I was the only girl and the oldest child. At times, this was a colossal pain. My mother was often overwhelmed by the babies and all her responsibilities. As the only girl, I had to do household chores. And since I was the oldest child, I also had to babysit. She watched Queen for a day on television some afternoons. It was on 5 afternoons a week.
I'm going to stop you here because we just
Okay.
have a few minutes and I want to know what's next.
What's next?
In your life.
Coming up?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for letting me read that. Well, there is a sequel. I'm not sure if I want to do that right now. I have another memoir, which starts in 1975, when I moved out to the East End. I was a single mom. You'll have to figure out what happened in all the years in between.
Sounds very interesting.
And I started, of all things, before I moved out here, I was living in suburban New Jersey, near Tenafly, New Jersey. Are we almost over?
Go ahead, finish.
And I started teaching belly dancing.
With that, we're going to finish. Thank you so much for
that's the subject
coming.
of the new memoir, my teaching out here.
Oh, this could be a TV show.
I don't know. I published something about that too.
That's great. That's great. That brought back so many memories. It's my next book then. I'm going to read it.
I hope so.
Yeah.
So if
I
you were
try to
there-
read it.